All right, hey everybody, welcome back. Good morning to you guys. Hopefully everyone's doing really well, staying healthy and safe. Today it's our Monday, April 6th meeting for 10 a.m. Chapman, Intro to Philosophy. So welcome one and all. Hopefully you guys are, here and doing well this morning. Had a good weekend. We're not at 10 a.m. yet, but just getting us started a little early. And then once 10 comes around, I'll help you guys get into the material of Gettier, finish discussion of the Gettier problem, and try and get through as much of the Rene Descartes material as we can today. Hello, William. Good morning to you and everybody else. Hopefully you're having a great start today. A little bit of rain. I don't know if that's Southern California. I don't know where everyone else is viewing it from at this point, but yeah, it's not the worst day, I guess, to be in with all the rain outside. Cool. So far, so good. Got a few here arriving early. Welcome everybody. Get comfortable. Okay, yeah, rain in the Bay, not bad. I see. Okay, well, all across California, I guess we're getting a little bit of the extra moisture. A good thing, probably. Yeah, sorry for you guys that, I can only imagine being in college at this point in time. I mean, it's weird enough as a professor, but at least we have the tools nowadays. I mean, can you imagine if this had happened 30 years ago without the internet? We would be all totally lost without the ability to really conduct classes. April showers before the May flowers? Yeah, you hope so. I think that it's going to be pretty green, nice year with the weather and stuff. At least so far it seems that way. But yeah, I mean, to be in college and to make the big move, to have that new independence, to be in a different place, meeting new people. Yeah, it's not too much a bummer because I'm sure this is a temporary phase and everything. But yeah, I really sympathize with you guys, and I hope that you're doing well in whatever situation you're finding yourselves in as we seek out shelter and safety during the little crisis or whatever. But anyways, good to see you guys. 9:56, so a few more minutes to go, and then we'll jump right into the lecture meeting. Let's see, if there's ever a person anytime during this remaining part of the course that wants to have the equivalent of an office hour face-to-face meeting, I'm always happy to do that. You can always have an appointment with me to do a Skype chat or whatever. So I don't know, that's kind of in substitute for face-to-face office hours. If anybody ever wants to, just let me know, and I'm happy to do that. We could just set up a time, but a couple students have done that, and it seems to work out pretty well. So just letting you guys know that, you can always email me about that issue if you ever want. We can Skype. And then the other thing is, I did grade all the midterms. I think I sent you guys a message letting you know, notification over the weekend through Blackboard. So a lot of you have requested your scores, but if you haven't, feel free anytime to send me a quick email, and I want to do it this way because then I can reply individually and show each person that asks the comments that were written on the exam itself. So let me know at any point. I'm teaching today, doing live streams and some other things until later in the evening, so I'll go back into my inbox tonight and tomorrow morning, and I'm just asking people to give me a 24-hour window between whenever you sent your request and when I get back to it, because I'm dealing with a lot of other emails. But for sure, you can get your scores on midterm and comments anytime they're done. And when you send your request, you'll get it back with a response within 24 hours. So just a little note for those who are watching right now. As always, just jump in and let me know if you ever have questions, comments, concerns, anything at all. I'm happy to take any time that's necessary for that. But good. Cool, so just another minute or so. Got some more people arriving. Looks good. Let's see. You guys got my Blackboard message, right? There was also a link in there to little YouTube video that kind of gave some more detail on the Gettier problem and went into some visual demonstrations of how some of those cases play out and how they work logically. So that would be a good supplement for anybody to back up the lectures on Gettier and the readings in the book. All right, well, so we are basically at the 10 o'clock hour, so I'm going to go on and get started. Welcome back, everybody. It's Monday. It's April 6th. We're tuning into this live stream at 10 a.m. and getting through our Intro to Philosophy meeting this morning to try today to cover the rest of Gettier, to start off the work of Descartes, and then we may have a little bit of Descartes that spans into the next lecture, but then we will branch off into a new topic, which is time, the metaphysics of time, what is the current best scientific understanding of the theory of time and its passage. We'll talk about the work of Albert Einstein and how his view of time really changed the older Newtonian conception of it. So that's a very interesting and weird topic, and we'll get into that as this week continues. But we still have a bit more to finish with epistemology. So let me go back into a quick review, and then we will cover the last part of Gettier. So epistemology is all about knowledge and what is human knowledge and how do we attain it and what is it composed of. The ancient Greeks thought that knowledge was justified true belief, and that's something that you see written in the work of Plato, expressed by his teacher Socrates. So you have to think something's true, it actually has to be true, it matches reality, and then you have to have reasons or evidence to defend, to justify the belief. If all three conditions were met, then you have knowledge, but not otherwise. He said, Socrates, in this Platonic dialogue, that it's better to have knowledge than to just have a correct opinion with no evidence. Because if you have a correct opinion, it's correct, that's good, but it's not likely to stay in your mind. It might not be remembered, it might be forgotten, you might change your mind about it if you have no reasons that you could state to explain why that is true. So having the addition of the reasons or justification, he said that adds value to a correct opinion, sort of like ropes add value to these mythical Daedalus statues. The thing that they add is that they prevent it from leaving, as it might if it was unattached to the ground. And justification prevents a true belief from leaving the mind because they ground it into your belief system by giving you those reasons to rely on. So justification makes a correct belief stable and likely to remain in the same way that the ropes do. After that, we worked on the material of Edmund Gettier. Okay, so Edmund Gettier basically is trying to demonstrate that classical Greek definition of knowledge is not perfect, that there's something a little bit inadequate about it, because we can characterize examples where a person has a justified true belief, but still doesn't have knowledge. And if that is the case, then that means the definition is not sufficient in and of itself, since there's cases where one has a justified true belief and yet doesn't have knowledge. So the first Gettier case is what we talked about last lecture, mostly. And in that case, Smith and Jones job hunt, we imagine that there's these two individuals, Smith and Jones. And they're both applying for the same job, but only one of them can get it. So they're kind of competing for the position. Now, in the example, Smith develops this belief that Jones will get the job, the other guy, and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, why did Smith come to believe that? Well, for two straight up reasons. Number one, the boss literally just tells Smith in a private moment, hey, I'm going to hire Jones. I'm just telling you that. I'm going to hire Jones. I'm not going to hire you. That's the boss that tells this to Smith. So that's why he believes that Jones will get the job. Then he believes that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, and the reason for that is also clear, and it is because he just counts them himself with his own hands. So he now has all these reasons to believe that Jones will get the job and that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Okay, now, he deduces from that a second proposition, which is simply very similar to the first, except it replaces the name Jones with a reference to the man who gets the job. So the second entailed proposition that Smith believes is the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. All right, so is he justified in believing that second statement? Yes. He's justified in believing it because it is simply a logical consequence of the first belief, which is justified in virtue of the statement of the boss and the counting of those coins by Smith. So in the end, Smith is justified in believing that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, in this scenario here, like in all Gettier cases, there's this little plot twist kind of ending thing where the belief the subject had turns out to be true, but not for the expected reason. So who can tell me, if you remember, what's the sort of finale to this little situation? We've got Smith believing that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket, and he has justification for that. But what happened in the end with this whole job hunt situation? What does play out in the end? I just want to see from you, so you could type in and let me see. Quick memory, going back to Friday. What does happen? We've got the situation set up where Smith believes that the man who gets the job has 10 coins. Now, Brian, Nellie, Jessica, the boss comes back and he says, haha, surprise, Smith. You ready for this? I'm actually hiring you, not Jones. So I was just kidding before. And then the other thing, correct, as Jessica Cesar is saying, he also has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, he just happens to have 10 coins in his own pocket. He did not know that fact about his own contents of his pocket. So let's go back to his belief. It was the statement that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. And is that true in the end? Yes. Because who is the man that gets the job? Well, surprisingly, it is Smith. And does he have 10 coins in his pocket? Also, coincidentally and surprisingly, yes. Now, did Smith believe that the man who gets the job will have 10 coins in their pocket? He did believe that. But the reason he believed it had everything to do with Jones and nothing to do with himself. He didn't think he was getting the job, and he also had no idea that he had 10 coins in his pocket. So the fact that this proposition turned out to be true in the end is really a matter of just coincidence and luck, given the fact that the evidence which it was based on is not related to the facts which make it true. So it turns out that we have a justified true belief of Smith that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket, but it is not knowledge. As Gettier and others have argued, in order to have knowledge, you cannot have the belief turn out to be true simply by coincidence or luck. It should be true in basis of a relationship to the evidence that you used to form the belief. So it demonstrates the case of a justified true belief that is not knowledge. Okay, now there are two Gettier cases in the essay. And if you had watched the video, which you should if you have time, it's a very brief little 20-minute YouTube clip, but it goes over the other Gettier case and a couple of others that have been developed in the literature since then. So we just talked about the first one, I believe, last lecture. And I also don't want to, omit reference to the second case, because there's only two in Gettier's original paper. So we went into Smith and Jones' job hunt. That's now been reviewed. Let's continue by discussing the second Gettier example in his paper, and then we'll be done with Edmund Gettier for now. So Gettier case 2. So let's call this one Smith, Jones, Brown, and Barcelona. Okay, so in this scenario, we yet again have these two characters which are just conveniently named Smith and Jones. So here they are, just for a visual. Smith, that's him. Jones, over here. Okay, now in this case, Smith and Jones are two people that are co-workers at the same office. So they are both employees of the same company, and they work together. Now, suppose that Smith has got this belief that he has formed based on good reasons and good evidence. And here's the belief. So I'm just going to put it as like a thought bubble here, create some more space now. Smith believes the following. It's just this statement. Jones, the other guy, the coworker, owns a Ford. Jones owns a Ford. That's what Smith believes. And I'm going to give you some detailed information. Why does he believe that? Okay, so, well, by the way, when we say Ford, that we are talking about a Ford car, like made by Ford Motor Company. So Smith believes that his coworker Jones owns a Ford car. Why does he believe that? Well, he has very clear reasons. It's because of this. Because when Jones comes to work, he pulls up in a Ford. And when you talk to Jones, it's like all he ever talks about. Hey, I own a Ford. You know that about me? I love Fords. I'm a Ford man. That's all I will ever drive. By the way, have you seen my Ford? It's parked right outside in the lot. Do you want to ride home? I'll take you home in my Ford car that I own because I'm a Ford lover and I'm a Ford owner. I own a Ford. Do you want to see the paperwork for it? Do you want to like take a look at it? Okay, so he's constantly talking about his Ford car. He clearly says to others that he owns it, and you can see him just driving up to work in it. So that gives Smith reasons to believe that Jones owns a Ford. It's the same reasons you have to believe anybody owns a car, which you see them driving in, and which they tell you it's theirs. So that's justification, isn't it, for Smith to believe that Jones owns a Ford. So he does. Now, to go a little further into this scenario, we actually have to take a little brief detour into the realm of logic and grammar, okay, because the case relies on some facts about logic next. So the next point in this example is we have to talk about what are called disjunctions, okay? There's a certain type of sentence which is called a disjunction sentence. So what is a disjunction? So disjunction is just a fancy word which refers to an either-or sentence. Okay, so in studies of logic and grammar, you'll learn that there's a taxonomy, there's a terminology for different types of sentences. One type of sentence is called a conjunction. That is, in other words, an and sentence. So if I say to you that it is Monday and we are listening to this lecture, that would be a conjunction. It is an and statement. It says two things. One thing is that this is Monday. Another thing is that the lecture is occurring. Now, another type of sentence, not a conjunction, but a disjunction, is an or statement. So that would be stated as follows, like I will either have pizza or tacos for dinner, either or. I will either study mathematics or chemistry. I will either watch a movie or take a nap. You know, so like these are all examples of disjunctions. And there's infinitely many of them depending on which parts of speech we place in the relevant roles. The form of a disjunction could be stated generically as A or B, where A and B stand for individual disjuncts, as they are called. Now, every disjunction has two components. They are called the disjuncts. You could say they are the left and the right disjunct. In a statement of the form A or B, A, the first part of the sentence, would be considered the initial or left disjunct, and B, that which falls after the term or, would be the right disjunct. Now, question, based on your common sense, how many of the two disjuncts of a disjunction have to be true for the statement overall to be true? So every disjunction has two disjuncts. How many of those two have to be true for the disjunction to be true? So if I told you, for example, that I will either have pizza or tacos for dinner. Question, let's get this clear. Which is the first disjunct in that statement? The statement being that I will either have pizza or I will have tacos for dinner. What will be the first left disjunct in that particular example? And William, I see your answer that it's one, and yes, it is. But let's be clear about this point. What's the initial disjunct of that statement that I'll either have pizza or tacos for dinner? Should be not too hard. The first disjunct in that case would be what? That I will have pizza. Correct, Brian. Yes. So now in connection with the previous question, how many disjuncts have to be true overall for the disjunction as a whole to be true? And you gave the right answer, William, that it is just one. And that should make sense to you, right? Because suppose that I say I will have either pizza or tacos for dinner. And then you come and you see me eating pizza later. Did I speak the truth in that case? Yes, because I said that I would either have pizza or tacos. What if you see me not with pizza, but instead with tacos? In that case, again, I said something true, because notice that when I make the statement, I don't say I will have pizza and tacos. That would imply both. That's a conjunction. But if I say I will either have pizza or tacos, it just means that I will have one or the other, right? At least one of them. So when there's a disjunction, only one of the two disjuncts has to be true. Let me give you another example. Is this a true disjunction? let's see. I am a student at Chapman. This is you speaking. I am a student at Chapman, or the moon is made of cheese. Is that true? That either you're a student at Chapman or the moon is made of cheese? Is this a true disjunction? Yes, it is. Good, correct. And the reason it is true is because the two disjuncts don't both have to be true for the disjunction to be true. At a minimum, only one has to be. So since you are a student at Chapman, the disjunction is true because either you're a student at Chapman or anything else is a true proposition. Either you're a student at Chapman or the world is flat is another true proposition because simply you're a student at Chapman. All right. Now, Smith has developed the belief that Jones owns a Ford. And I told you that he has all those reasons, very good reasons to believe that. So let's now say that Smith is a big fan of logic. And for whatever weird reason, he likes to form disjunctions based on this belief. So he believes, based on this statement, 3 disjunction statements. And here they are. The first one says either Jones owns a Ford or Brown. Okay, now about Brown. Before I write this down, I got to give you some backstory. This other guy's name is Brown. So there's another character in the scenario whose name is Brown. Brown is a person who Smith has not seen or heard from in a long time. It's like a long, good reasons to believe that Jones owns a Ford. So simply on the basis of that evidence, he forms these 3 propositional beliefs. Each one is going to disjoin the statement that Jones owns a Ford to a randomly selected place name of the possible whereabouts of Brown. So the first belief is going to say either Jones owns a Ford or Brown, long lost friend, is in Boston. Okay, second belief. Either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Barcelona, Spain. Third is either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in, wait for it, okay, Brest-Litovsk is like maybe not as well known Eastern European capital. But anyway, 3 beliefs. Now, why is it that Smith believes any of these things? He's basing all of them just on the belief that Jones owns a Ford, which he does have reasons for. But about Brown, he has no idea where in the world Brown is, and he just randomly tosses that on to the disjunction because, as the closure principle would have it, if you're justified in believing a proposition, then you're justified in believing any logical consequence that is entailed by that proposition. So, for example, Jones owns a Ford logically implies that either Jones owns a Ford or anything. Because with a disjunction, you only need evidence for one of the disjuncts to have evidence justifying the whole disjunction. So that means that Smith is actually justified in believing all 3 of these. And why is it? It's because he's justified merely in the belief of the first disjunct, the left-hand one, that Jones owns a Ford, because he does have evidence for that I mentioned. Okay, now in this Gettier case, there's another one of these weird little plot twist endings. Okay, and here's how this one goes in the end. As it turns out, Jones does not own a Ford. This was a big, elaborate hoax. He's just faking it. He's driving and pulling up to work in a rental Ford car that he does not own himself. And so despite his, but it's false. On the other hand, though, and this is a totally random coincidence that Smith had no idea about, but it just so happens that Brown, long lost Brown, is hanging out right now in Barcelona, in Spain. So which of these 3 disjunctions then actually turned out to be true in the end? You can tell me the number. There's 3 propositions written. One of those 3, based on the facts I've stated, is true in the end. It's which one? 1, 2, or 3? It is the second one, correct. Because the second one says that either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Now, did Smith believe that? Yes. Did he have justification for believing that? Again, yes, because he had reason to believe that Jones owns a Ford. Third question, is this statement true? And is it true? Proposition 2. It actually is. But why is it true? Because of which disjunct being true? The second proposition is true. It's a true. It is not true at all because of the information concerning Jones owning a Ford, because that was misleading justification, but nonetheless false. So what we can say in the end of this scenario is that Smith has a justified true belief that either either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. But even though he has a justified true belief in this, the intuition is that it is not knowledge. It's not knowledge because his evidence bears on the first disjunct, which is not the one that is true. But the thing that makes the proposition be true is the second disjunct, which he had no evidence to believe at all. So once again, we see a possible scenario where an individual arrives at a justified true belief, but the evidence which provided the justification is unrelated to the factors that make the belief true. Okay? You say, doesn't it not count if the second disjunct is not justified? Good question, William. No, it still is considered a justified belief because return to the closure principle for a moment. The closure principle says that if an individual is justified in believing a statement A and that A entails B, then if they deduce B from A, they are likewise justified in believing B. So because it only takes one disjunct to be true for a disjunction to be true, it thus means that evidence which justifies one of the two disjuncts is sufficient in and of itself to justify the belief in the whole thing. So he does not need evidence to bear on the whereabouts of Brown to have a justified belief in the disjunction, because the disjunction doesn't rely on both terms being true, only one. So whatever is sufficient evidence for one of them is sufficient evidence for the whole. Therefore, we get to the result that Mr. Smith has a justified true belief in proposition 2, but he does not actually know that proposition. And so it's another counterexample to the definition of knowledge provided by the ancient Greeks. This second Gettier example is a little more complex, I feel, than the first, because it does require a slight little detour into the realm of logic, where we must discuss how disjunctions work logically and how you are justified in believing them, even if you're only justified in believing one half. Now, other Gettier cases all have that similar feature, that a person is led to a true belief based on good evidence, but the evidence itself doesn't have anything to do with the reason the belief turned out being true. Like I gave you the example of me looking for my car in one parking lot, and I came to the belief that my car is in a given aisle because I saw a different car that I thought was mine. When I came to look at that car, realizing it was not mine, I noticed that my actual car was parked in the aisle 2 cars away in a different stall. Now, did I believe my car was in that aisle? Yes. Did I have some reason to think so? Yes. The appearance of the other car was the reason. And was it true that my car was in that aisle? Again, yes. But based on the description of the case, I hope we could agree that I did not actually know that my car was in that aisle, even if I had a justified true belief that it was, because the evidence that was my justification was not based on the actual existence of my car, but a different one. So it was just kind of luck, wasn't it, that my evidence led me to a true belief, given that it was not based on the fact that made the proposition true. And let me give you one more Gettier case. If you watch the video link that I sent to you guys via Blackboard, you'll see some additional cases like these that add additional discussion, and that's helpful. But here's one more while we're on the topic. Okay, so suppose that you were driving around somewhere, and you looked off to the right-hand side of the road, and what you saw there was what looked to be a barn. So to all appearances, you see a barn in the field, and therefore you form a belief right there that there is a barn in that field to my right. Okay, so that I hope makes clear sense, right? You're driving, you see what looks to be a barn, so thus you believe there's a barn in the field. Now let me continue with this case a little bit. Suppose that what you were looking at, although it appears to be a barn from your viewpoint of the road, it's not a barn, it's just a wall. It's like an individual facade designed to look like a barn from the passing by motorists. But in fact, if you go up close to it, you'll see that there's no interior and that there's not four walls. It's a single wall. So it's a facsimile of a barn facade, right? Not really a barn, but just a wall. Nonetheless, behind that barn wall facade, which is something that you cannot see from the road, there actually is, behind the wall, an actual what? See if you can guess. So follow me. You saw a facade thinking it's a barn. You therefore believed there's a barn in that field. It's not a barn, it's a facade. But behind the facade, unseen by the viewer, there actually was a what? A real barn. Okay, good. Now, let's go back to our example and some features of it. Did this driver think there was a barn in the field? Yes, that's their belief. Was there evidence that there's a barn in that field? Yes, the appearance of the facsimile. And was it true that there's a barn in that field? Well, also, the answer is yes, there is a barn in that field, but it was just a sight unseen by the believer. So did the believer have a justified true belief that there was a barn there? Yes. But yet again, I hope that we could have the intuition in common that this is not a case of knowledge, because the actual barn, which is in the field, was not the source that provided the evidence to the same claim. So in any scenario where you arrive at a true belief, but based on evidence or justification that is unrelated to the truth of the proposition, then we would say you're in a Gettier example where you have a justified true belief, but you don't actually know the thing that you believe. So that's it. That's really Gettier's point, that through the consideration of such examples, we can see situations where a justified true belief does not add up to knowledge. Knowledge is not something that one can possess merely by coincidence, luck, or chance. So what's the real definition of knowledge then? It's justified true belief plus something extra that would block these Gettier cases from happening, some anti-luck criteria. But that is the very difficult point to fully articulate in a theory. Since Gettier wrote his paper in 1963, we're all kind of now living in the post-Gettier era, where there has not developed a consensus position on what the definition of knowledge actually is. So it's like he shattered the existing paradigm, and we're now left trying to reconstruct the right definition in the wake of his results, and no exact universal consensus has emerged. So it's a very interesting and strange result, the fact that we're not totally clear about what knowledge is. It has something to do with having true beliefs. It has something to do with having evidence for those true beliefs. But there has to be some type of required principle that allows it such that the evidence cannot be unrelated to the causal factors that make the belief true. And it's very difficult to precisely express what that additional missing item is. And so we're all kind of still grappling for the proper answer to this question: what is the definition of knowledge? Gettier showed that we didn't quite have the correct solution yet. And so that's work for further research. Anyway, so I would leave you with that on the Gettier, and if you would like to go back, review it more, you can always, view these lectures later, go back to the text, or perhaps look at some of the supplemental videos that I've given you. And there's a lot of other stuff out there about the Gettier problem, since it's so widely discussed in the field. Okay, so I'm gonna, for now anyways, let us move on from this. And we're on to the last author on this topic of epistemology and the theory of knowledge. So now we're going to speak a little bit about this guy, René Descartes. Okay, so Descartes, one of the big, heavy hitter, widely known names in the world of philosophy. This is a French philosopher who lived from 1596 until the year 1650. And he wrote a very important book, and that's what we're kind of trying to take a brief look at here. It's called The Meditations, and he wrote it in 1641. So 1641, Descartes' classic, The Meditations. The full title of it is a little more wordy, Meditations on First Philosophy. But it's informally called The Meditations by most who talk about it, or Descartes' Meditations. So The Meditations is a book that has got 6 chapters. Each chapter is numbered a different meditation. So you basically got meditation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Today's remaining part of the meeting, and then spanning over into Wednesday, we're going to try and understand the first 2 meditations, meditations 1 and 2. So that's the first 2 chapters. So I'll get us started on the discussion of the first 2 meditations today. In a couple of weeks, when we've moved on to another topic, which is the philosophy of mind, we will actually study the 6th meditation as well. So by the time we're done with our semester, we will have reviewed 3 of the 6 chapters of this important book. So we will have read, half of this classic piece of writing in philosophy, the Meditations. Okay, so what is this book about? I have to kind of tell you guys a little bit about the historical context within which this book was written, because you can see the date and time period. Now, what's going on in the Western world at around that time in history? We're following closely after the Renaissance era at this point, and the 16th, the 17th century are sometimes regarded by historians of the time period as the Age of Reason, because what you start to see happening is that there's this massive explosion of new secular and scientific understanding happening in the West in all different academic disciplines. So like, for example, in mathematics, Leibniz and Newton are developing calculus and trigonometry. In physics, we've got Newtonian principles now newly developed. In art, there are new artistic techniques that allow for the more realistic rendering of images by means of the vanishing point. Descartes himself is not just a philosopher, he's a mathematician, a geometrician, and scientist. And so he, if you've ever studied geometry, is the namesake that is given credit for the Cartesian coordinates, taken from his last name, Descartes. So there's also advances in biology. People are starting to learn more about anatomy, about the cell being the primary unit of biological matter. So there's just this massive explosion of new understanding and knowledge happening in the West. And part of that is because we've emerged beyond, at that point, the medieval period, closely following the Renaissance now. A lot of secular knowledge had been suppressed during that entire era because it had been considered by some to run counter to orthodox teachings of the church. During the medieval period, the church was the eminent institution for all higher learning, and it also jointly administered functions of the state. So there wasn't this separation of church and state back then. There wasn't like, an educational system in which you were given secular lessons divided from ecclesiastical or theological lessons. So anyways, as the influence of the church kind of waned a little bit, the academy and what had previously been considered unorthodox views from the standpoint of the church were given more space to develop. And that's where Descartes' writing this book in that time period, in that intellectual climate. Now, because he sees this rapid advance happening in the scientific knowledge that's being presented and disseminated in the West, he thought, here's what we need to do. We should make sure to place the structure of scientific knowledge on an absolutely firm and unshakable foundation. He thought about it kind of on a metaphor of like architecture. Suppose that you consider the body of human knowledge as something like a towering structure in an architectural sense. As beautiful and ornate and elaborate as this structure may be, if it's built on a shaky foundation of loose, sand, then it's liable to collapse at some future time, and then we will lose all the value of all those results. So he says, let's try and make sure that we get started on the right foot, as it were, with science, and make sure that that entire enterprise is based on an absolutely firm, solid, unshakable foundation at the bottom. So that's what the Meditations is about. It's Descartes' attempt to go out on a quest for certainty. And he thinks that if he can discover what is absolutely certain, what cannot be doubted, then that will be the sort of thing that can be placed at the bottom of our body of scientific knowledge and will serve as this firm, solid foundation stone to the whole thing. Okay? So Meditations is him saying, I'm going to try and find out what is certain, something that we could never doubt. And once I find out what that is, then that will be my leverage point to build everything else on top of, scientifically and otherwise, when it comes to human knowledge. Okay, so like just I'm giving you guys a really brief summary statement of why Descartes wrote this book. He's writing it in the intellectual climate of the age of reason, closely following the Renaissance. In the bigger picture of history, this is as the Western world moves beyond a strictly religious orientation when it comes to higher knowledge and research, and he wants to contribute to that emerging world by writing a book that will help us to understand what's absolutely certain that can be used as this foundation. Okay, so he begins with meditation 1 and 2 to discuss his overall project here. He says at the beginning, think about when you're a little kid, right, or a child, and consider the fact that when you're that young, there's a lot of things that you believe that later on, when you're more mature and when you have more experience, you go back and you think, I can't believe I ever thought that that was true. I was so young and naive and immature or whatever, just unexperienced, that I thought these things were true, but clearly they're false. You know, so like when you're a little kid, maybe you have superstitious beliefs or, you know, weird random beliefs that are not based on anything. And then you get older and you're like, wow, that was really way off. Now I'm smarter and I'm more mature. Now he says, I basically don't want to repeat that same process again as an adult, as I'm trying to discover facts about science and the world. So I don't want to, like, let's say, go way out there, develop a whole bunch of scientific theories and results, but then have to eliminate all of them because I realized that I had false assumptions that I started off with in the beginning. So he says, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try and make sure that I have something solid and stable that I can rely on. And here's how he puts it. Descartes is actually a quite clear writer, and he writes in, I think, a very lucid, easy way. So he says this on the beginning of the first paragraph of First Meditations, page 351. Some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood, and by the highly doubtful nature of the whole structure that I had subsequently based on them. I realized that it was necessary once in the course of my life to demolish everything completely and start again right from the foundations if I wanted to establish anything at all in the sciences that was stable and likely to last. But the task looked an enormous one, and I began to wait until I should reach a mature enough age to ensure that no subsequent time of life would be better for tackling such an inquiry. This led me to put the project off for so long that I would now be to blame if by pondering over it any further, I wasted the time still left for carrying it out. So today, I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of free time. I am quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions. Okay, so he says, now I finally got the time to do this thing that I put off for too long, really, and that is to go back to the foundations of my own beliefs and find out what is absolutely certain in there that I can use as this pillar of certainty to build everything upon. All right, now, how do we find out this stuff that is totally certain? Descartes has a method to suggest. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about now is what Descartes calls the method of doubt. And this is really the heart of his entire book here. He says, using this method, you can and will discover what is those things that cannot be doubted. And then you'll have, mission accomplished for his meditations, which is to arrive at what those certainties are. So I'm going to talk to you now about the method of doubt. This is how Descartes said that you should try to pursue certainty and to understand what is certain. So method of doubt. Descartes' famous method of doubt. Okay, so in a way it's pretty simple. He just says this. Assume to be false anything that can even possibly be doubted, okay? There you go. That's the method of doubt, briefly stated. It says, as you can read, that you should assume to be false, like actually not true, assume to be false anything and everything that could even possibly be doubted. So we're talking about the assumption of falsehood of a belief or statement that has even the smallest little percentage chance of being incorrect. So we're not saying things that are really doubtful, let's assume they're false. We're going further than that and saying if it's even remotely possible that it could be false, even if it is like 0.00000 bunch of zeros, 1% chance that it could be false, that's not certain enough. And then let's just assume it's false, rule it out, and continue on to the next belief in our belief system until hopefully we arrive at something that cannot be doubted like that. And then by means of this method, we will expose those beliefs that can't be doubted. It's kind of like a process of elimination, if you will. When I was a student way back at UCLA, I had an example given to me by one professor to explain this a little, and I thought it was helpful. So I'll pass it on to you a little bit. Suppose that you're like shopping for produce and you wanted to buy an apple, right? And suppose that your goal was to buy the most perfect specimen of apple, pristine, unblemished in every way, just an ideal specimen. So, you go to the big barrel or whatever where the apples are, and you pull one out and you say, oh, this looks like the one that I want. But then you look at it as you turn it over and you say, ah, wait, it's not exactly 100% perfect. There's this one tiny little bruise, one tiny little divot on it. So this isn't the one that I wanted, that's the ideal case. I'm moving on because it has a little blemish, setting it to the side, and I'm going through the remaining part of the barrel. And hopefully eventually in the same way, by holding each one to scrutiny, I'll determine which ones don't have any problem, and that'll be the certain thing. Now, this is a metaphor, right? Because obviously the method of doubt doesn't say sort through apples in a barrel, but it does say go through the beliefs in your belief system. And so the equivalent would be hold a belief up to the light of skepticism. And if there's any even very far out remote possibility it could be false, then it's on to the next, assume it's false, and continue in the same method until we align on something that cannot possibly be doubted at all. Okay, so that's the method of doubt. Now, once this method of doubt is being applied, Descartes shows or argues that there is a lot of stuff that can actually be doubted. In fact, almost everything can be, at least as long as we're applying this extremely scrutinizing method to the beliefs that we have. So, claim coming next, and this is a big one. Based on this method of doubt, he says that all beliefs that are based on sense perception can be doubted. Okay. Okay, so sense perception. One big source of beliefs that we have comes from our sense perception. And what is sense perception? It's just the use of the 5 senses to perceive your world. Okay, so I'm talking about sight, taste, touch, hearing, and smell. For example, right now, wherever you're watching this lecture at, there's a computer in front of you or some device that you can view this lecture on. And don't you believe that that device exists? Like, wouldn't you agree or believe anyway that your computer that you're watching this on exists and that you're right now at your home or wherever you're at looking at it? You'd think that that's pretty obvious. But here's the thing, and Descartes really wants to make this apparent in his book. What would have to be the case for you to be wrong about that? Like, what would have to be going on right now for your sense perception to be failing you so that you think you're watching a lecture and that you're sitting at home looking at a computer? But that's not happening at all. So how could it be that your sense perception is not always correct? What would be the possible case where your senses are failing you? Like a question to you, because he says that this is capable of being doubted. Even the perception that you're having right now, like hearing my voice or seeing the image of me. Under what circumstances could your beliefs about your surroundings be wrong? Now, one case is hallucinating. Jordan, you're saying on drugs or dreaming. Good. So what Descartes goes with is the dreaming possibility. I don't know if the type of, or there's also the virtual reality simulation. Yes, that's gained a little bit of discussion over the last couple of generations or years. Like a matrix type scenario, correct. Descartes says this. He says, look, you right now believe that, look around you, wherever you're sitting at, look at your surroundings. You can see things, you can see, taste, touch, hear, and smell things around you. But what if this was all a dream? If it was a dream, then the things that you think you're perceiving with your five senses would not actually be real. Okay, so like go back to the last example where you had a vivid dream and you thought what was going on in the dream really was happening. This happens all the time to all of us, of course, me included. Like I'll have dreams where uncomfortable and awkward things are happening. I've had dreams where, for example, I'm teaching a class like I'm teaching now. And in the middle of the dream, I kind of forget my notes and it becomes hard for me to remember what I was saying, and I can't really read in the dream too easily. So I start to feel really embarrassed. And then I wake up and I'm like, oh, nice, that wasn't even real. I'm glad that that didn't actually happen. But while it was occurring in the dream state, I thought that it was real. And I thought that the surroundings I perceived in that case were real. So in a similar sense, maybe you think right now that you're attending a lecture virtually and watching it on a computer. But if everything's a dream, then none of those things could be happening. And maybe, in fact, you're really in a completely different situation in the larger reality if you were ever to awake from the dream. Now, you might hear that suggestion and think, but that's really completely implausible, because I could just see and tell that this is so vivid and clear that this cannot be a dream that I'm having right now. But the thing is, he points out that there are sometimes very vivid dreams. And therefore, there's no sure way to distinguish the case of being awake from being asleep. Furthermore, if your entire life has been a dream to this point, then you would not have anything to compare the vividness of this dream with. So you could not say, well, when I'm dreaming, it's vague, and when I'm awake, it's very clear. And this is much clearer than that. Because if the entire life that you've had to this point has been all a big illusion, simulation, dream, or whatever, then there would not be anything more vivid to compare it with that you could say rules out the possibility that this is a dream. So because of the possibility of realistic dreams, maybe you're dreaming right now, and therefore, according to the method of doubt, you will assume to be false all the things that you're perceiving. So whatever you see, taste, touch, hear, or smell, let's assume it's all false and that it actually is all a dream. So even the body that you think that you have and your physical appearance could have nothing to do with your actual appearance in reality. You may not even have the physical form that you think that you do have. Perhaps you are just a soul or a spirit or some type of gas in a cloud or something else. But at any rate, if everything around you is assumed as a dream, then all bets are off about what reality is really like in the actual case. So let me read a few of the things of Descartes here, and then you can hear how he put the point. He said, so to accomplish the demolition of my opinions, it will not be necessary for me to show that all my opinions are false. Reason now leads me to think that I should hold back my assent from opinions which are not completely certain. So for the purpose of rejecting all my opinions, it will be enough if I find in each one of them at least some reason for doubt. And to do this, I will not need to run through them all individually. Once the foundations are undermined, the building collapses of its own accord. He continues, whatever I have up till now accepted as most true, I have acquired either from the senses or through the senses. But from time to time, I have found that the senses deceive, and it's prudent not to trust those that have deceived. Yet although the senses occasionally deceive us with respect to objects which are very small or in the distance, there are many other beliefs about which doubt is not possible, even though they are derived from the senses. For example, that I am here sitting by the fire wearing a winter gown, holding this piece of paper, and so on. How could it be denied that these hands or this body are mine? Unless perhaps I were to liken myself to madmen whose brains are damaged by vapors of melancholia. But he says below, a brilliant piece of reasoning, as if I were not a man who sleeps at night and regularly has all the same experiences while asleep as madmen do when awake. Indeed, sometimes even more improbable ones. How often asleep at night am I convinced of such familiar events, that I am in my gown, sitting by the fire, when in fact I am lying in bed. Yet at the moment, my eyes seem to be awake when I look at this piece of paper. So suppose then that I am dreaming, since this cannot be conclusively ruled out. Now, I want you all to understand that this is not how the meditations ends. He does not just say, hey, maybe everything's a dream and I'm done. No, in fact, he doesn't leave it at that. If we can, and as we continue through the book, you will see that he does take a very long, looping, winding path back to everyday common sense. So by the time the book is done, he will reestablish confidence in our everyday beliefs that yes, your five senses are generally accurate and the world does exist, that there's an external reality, it's the world that you are perceiving, and there are other minds in it and all of that. But he does not want to help himself to these assumptions before he believes that he can prove it. So he, limits himself with the method of doubt to the only most evident things. Sense perception doesn't make the cut at first, but by the time the book is over, he will reestablish those beliefs again. So maybe one misunderstanding of Descartes is he just says everything's a dream and everything's fake. But no, I mean, that's just the opening gambit. He says it's a possibility, and therefore we're going to take the possibility seriously that everything could be a dream or an illusion until we have better reasons to suppose otherwise. And he will eventually give us those added reasons. But for now, anyway, we're just playing along with the method of doubt and just asking and pondering the question: can I rely on or place absolute certain confidence in my sense perception? And at the initial answer is no, because dreams are realistic enough, and they give you the proof of concept that sometimes when you think things are happening, they're not really happening. So we're pretty much low on time, but we're going to resume with this next time. So I want you to finish meditation 1 and 2, and you can start looking at the writing of Einstein when you're done with that, because that's coming next. It's interesting, all film scenarios where the big plot twist is like it was all a dream, whether this is like Matrix or Inception or something, they're all kind of based around the skeptical scenarios introduced by earlier generations of philosophers like Descartes. Now, of course, Descartes didn't have the computing and stuff that would have made him think, consider it to be a computer simulation or hologram. But in his day, using the intellectual concepts that were at hand, he refers us to the idea of dreams, which is an interesting substitute for the same idea before the introduction of these more science fictional scenarios did exist. Okay, so stay tuned, everybody. Be back on Wednesday, and you'll hear the little cliffhanger conclusion of this. How do we get back to everyday common sense, or at least try, from the method of doubt, which has temporarily plunged us into complete confusion about whether anything that we perceive via the 5 senses is true. Let's see how he tries to take that circle back to everyday common sense, and we will just continue in the notes in the same order that you guys see. So have a great one, everyone. Do remember that you can ask me for your midterm scores if you haven't done it yet. And just give me within 24 hours to reply to your message, and you'll get that score with some comments. But anyways, thanks a lot to you guys. And if anyone ever wants to, chat on a Skype type of meeting or anything, let me know. I can always do that too for any individual that would like. So, all right, have a good one, everyone. Take care, and I'll see you back on Wednesday morning. Thank you.